Welcome to Bookwrights House, where stories come to life and authors feel right at home. This afternoon, we're excited to have a special conversation with Mr. Walter Benesch, author of It's Me, The Early Years, Letters to My Daughter. Good afternoon, Mr. Walter. I'm Elijah Barcelona, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today.
No, thank you from the East Coast.
Thank you. So before we dive in, I just want to say how grateful we are to have you with us on this beautiful afternoon. It's Me, The Early Years, Letters to My Daughter is such a unique and heartfelt journey, and we can't wait to hear more about the inspiration behind your letters to your daughter. So let's get started. So, first and foremost, let's talk about the inspiration behind the memoir.
Yeah,
Yes.
I can
So,
go right into it. When my
okay.
daughter started her undergraduate work, she said to me, Papa, don't send me the usual letters of nonsense. I've heard so many strange stories about you and Grandma that I want you to tell me your life experience and your life stories. And that's how the letter started. It was virtually a letter a week and then a letter a month and then irregular letters as she was into graduate school, but basically relating the history of my life. And
Mhm.
interspersed was not only my life, but my mother's life as well, because some of her experiences were just as wild and just as strange. So that's how it started. And so this was an accumulation of many years of letters that created the first book. And I'm almost finished with the second. And there's a third and a fourth possible too. Who knows?
Yes. Okay, so can you describe the process of writing these letters? How did it feel to revisit your past and share those experiences with your daughter?
Well, it's very simple because in the last 3 years of her life, my mother was actually living in an in law apartment in what you consider as the basement of our house that I was at. And she and I would review virtually everything that occurred in my early years, things that I remembered, things that I may have forgotten, and things like that. And then she would also relate her life story as well. And that became the foundation for the letters once my daughter started her undergraduate work. And I might add that she said that all her roommates, her four roommates, were excited about getting the next letter each week because it was like a soap opera, just where they could read the letter and share it and say, "Oh, wow, that's wild."
So, resilience is a key theme in your memoir. What specific life experiences do you think exemplify this theme for you?
Well, basically, I have experienced things that most normal, everyday people don't experience. And that's why I have a subtitle is The Extraordinary Experiences of an Ordinary Individual. And I consider myself very ordinary, more or less, except as I've had extraordinary experiences, be it past life memories, because I have glimpses of at least four, possibly five previous incarnations. I had a UFO land in my backyard in a landing pattern that my mother put there, of
Mhm.
all things. So, and a father who actually saw it, but he was so scared he was hiding underneath my bed when running into the house. And for the rest of his life, he would always say, "I didn't see a thing. I didn't see a thing." And why were you hiding under my bed? you know. So I've had a lot of experiences, and then also later on in life, the college experiences were rather unique and unusual. And then what I'm working on next will be my history in New York as a social worker in Fort Apache, South Bronx, during the worst years, and then graduate work at Boston University and so on. So I've had a wild life, and I just felt it was enough information there and things that are out of the ordinary that would be willing to share with others, especially now that I think some portions of our society are more open to some of these ideas. Now that, for instance, the book Eminent came out, where a individual who was assigned by the Pentagon to study UFOs has come out and said they are real, and that more and more people are beginning to accept the idea of reincarnation. They're not just Buddhists and Hindus, but there are a huge group of Christians that also believe in reincarnation, and others who are just non-denominational who also believe in it. And I've run into so many in my life, so that's also fascinating. So all this kind of rolled in together, and I felt it was appropriate for me to write my own experiences.
Okay, so your memoir blends your personal stories of those of your father and grandmother. So, how did you approach weaving these narratives together, and what insights did you gain through this process?
Well, there's very not that much with my father because let's face it, my father, I was a battered child, and that was the shall we say the grounds for the divorce when my parents divorced when I was age 7, and I had very little contact. I only had contact with him, I think, 4 times after that until he died. But with my mother, she obviously became a single parent, and so we had this close interaction. Now, yes, there was problems with my mother. Towards my high school years, she became an alcoholic, and I was virtually raising myself. But nevertheless, her experiences as well were related to me. How she got married. She had to get married at 16 because she was afraid her mother was going to kill her if she didn't get out of the house. And how she married somebody who was 56 and divorced him based upon him beating her, and moved to California and her experiences in California. What was fascinating is the openness of my mother to relate the good, the bad, and the indifferent on her life, which also added to the book. So it's not only an autobiography of myself, but it's a biography of my mother as we evolved. And I always find fascinating her earliest memory. She says that she must have been 3 years old. It happened in, obviously, 1915. And she said there was a cousin or an uncle of the Tunstall family that drove up with a buckboard wagon, and there was somebody in the back of the buckboard wagon, and he asked my grandmother, my daughter's great grandmother, can I bring Billy in because he needs help and he's been injured? And for the first time in my mother's experience, her mother blew up at a relative who she usually would bow down to and said, I'm not going to let that guy in this house no matter what. And then once the Tunstall left, she turned to her older brother, and she remembered this talk very vividly. She said, now, don't you believe all those dime store novels about Pat Garrett killing Billy the Kid? That was Billy the Kid in the damn wagon, and I'm not going to let him in my house. I don't care how old he is. He's still no good. And that just simply stuck in my mother's memory as the very first childhood memory she had. If that was true, Billy the Kid would have been in his 50s.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about the impact of family legacy. So, how do you believe sharing these stories with your daughter contributes to her understanding of family legacy and identity?
Well, first off, my daughter was always very curious about my life. So this way it is able to document it and have it so that she has it forward, not only for herself, but for her partner and other people as well. But because there were so many unusual incidences here, it is not only a legacy of myself, but for other people who may have had some of the similar experiences, but are very resident and reluctant to talk about them. At my age, I could care less anymore what anybody thinks about me. So that's why I'm willing to share these things. But they are unusual, and I know other people have had these experiences as well, but may be very reluctant to share them. And hopefully this book will help open them up as well.
Okay, so before that, you mentioned challenges as such as poverty and discrimination. How have these experiences influenced your values and outlook on life?
Well, I can guarantee you that politically, I'm definitely left of center.
Mhm.
But other than that, as a social worker, I worked with the kids in the South Bronx and worked with poverty and worked with people who needed help. So I'm very cognizant of what their needs are. And now my oldest daughter, who was the recipient of these letters, is now an emergency ward doctor in Oakland, California. So she's kind of carrying on the family legacy of wanting to help others who are in need of help. And so I think that's very important. And so it's carrying on, shall we say, a rather interesting legacy between us and between the generations. So I think that's very important for her. And it's very heartwarming for me that she is following up where her father was just a social worker. Now she's a medical doctor. So, that's fun. That's good.
That's so nice. Okay, so how do you envision readers connecting with your story? What emotions or reflections do you hope to invoke in them?
Well, it's like I said, I think some of the things that I have experienced, so many others have experienced as well. Like I was battered. Well, there's been a lot of children who have been battered and may have been the subject of divorce. And so that is related in the book. Then the question of spirituality. My father gave me a Bible and said, "You read that no matter what." So I read it. It took me years to read it and get through the nonsense. And by the way, that's how I feel about the Bible. That it's a beautiful picture of fictionalized history. But there's so many contradictions in it, which I love to go into. But we don't have time here, that's for sure. But anyway, the point is that then my mother introduced me to all the world's religions. And so by the time I was 13, she said, "Well, you've got to choose one." And so I said, "Well, the only thing that makes sense to me are the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path of Buddhism. But since Buddhism doesn't care if you belong to anything else, and you're a mystical Christian, Mom, I'll call myself a Buddhist/Christian." And I've been doing that ever since. And so that is kind of the foundation of where I came from. So maybe those people who are not comfortable with the religion will see how I evolved. Not only that, have there been other people who have seen UFOs, have been reluctant to talk about them? Well, now that the government has finally admitted that there are some unidentified objects out there, maybe they're more willing to see it. Now, from my perspective, where I saw one land in my backyard in 1954, I believe. So, this has been around for a long time. We haven't been willing to admit it. Likewise, the idea of reincarnation, especially when I was working in the South Bronx, I had a child come to me and they didn't know why they were coming to me. And I would look at him at the eye and I said, "Are you having memories of things that you cannot explain?" And all of a sudden, they were able to open up to me. And the emotional release and relaxation that came to them, realizing that maybe they weren't crazy. Maybe there is such a thing as a previous life. And now that the University of Virginia Medical School is actually documenting and researching past lives and near-death experiences, they have documented well over, I think, 100,000 cases, as they say, suggestive of reincarnation, which was started by Ian Stevenson, 30 years ago, 40 years ago now. So it's interesting that even science is beginning to look at this. The medical school at the University of Virginia. So all of these things are coming together. And I'm hoping that my own personal experience will open up and allow other people to express their feelings and their experiences as well.
So let's talk about that experience. So, with your extensive background in social work, anthropology, and writing, how have these disciplines informed your storytelling?
Well, very simple, because I have academically and personally, I am interested in just about everything you can possibly imagine.
Mhm.
So my anthropology, archaeology master's was the start of, in that area, a form of science, but also fascinating. And I studied with some absolutely outstanding professors. One of my professors was Dr. Ralph Holloway, who was perhaps one of the foremost paleoanthropologists in the world. He was actually teaching at Columbia University, but he moonlighted at the New School of Social Research, where I got my master's, because there at the New School, he could teach the courses he wanted the way he wanted to, rather than have to salute and prescribe the way Columbia University wanted him to teach. So it was fun. And so he got me involved in a lot of other things, including my work with the chimpanzee, where I lived with the chimpanzee for 3 years too, but that's another issue. But anyway, the point is that then my personal life experiences, running into so many different people, having so many different experiences and so on, kept on me going out and broadening my understanding of the world, of people, and trying to understand it in a much broader context than the narrow, prescribed, normal acceptance that most people are stuck into. And I might add that I also have studied a little bit of the Kabbalah, for those who may recognize some of the symbolism behind me, but that also helps me explain it as well.
Let's talk about your future projects. I guess you mentioned earlier that you wanted to write more books on this. So, are there any other future writing projects or themes you're excited to explore beyond this memoir?
Well, yes, the next book is actually, it's me from the Big Apple to Beantown. which is my experiences in New York and Boston. And the book is completed. I'm doing the final editing of my own edit before I hire an actual editor. And then I just mentioned that I lived with and worked with a chimpanzee. That was Nim Chimpsky, the sign language chimpanzee with Columbia University. That would be another one. It's me with Nim. Mm-hmm. And what's fascinating about that one, it would be a rather short narrative, but at the end would be the list of recipes that Nim and I invented every Sunday morning. He and I would invent pancake recipes, and he loved pancakes. But I would lay out a variety of different flours and spices and all sorts of things. He would select what he wanted in that pancake that morning. Mm-hmm. And so that would be another book. And then, of course, it's me, Washington, D.C. to the end. God knows what the end is going to be, but when I moved on here, I worked for the Pentagon for 18 years, almost 18 years. I worked for the D.C. Welfare Office for a number of years and had a lot of fascinating projects and controversies there. So there's an ongoing narrative, which is absolutely fascinating and can show the various travels and ways and journeys that I have in my life, I think, which could all be shared. At the same time, I have a weekly message that goes out to over 300 people that I send it out to. And then somebody who picks it up transmits it to 2,000 other people around the world. And I've been doing that weekly message now for over 6 years. But that just shows my varied interest, because I continue to subscribe to archaeology magazines. I subscribe to an astronomy magazine. I subscribe to a science magazine. And then, of course, half a dozen other journals as well. And anything that pops into my head, oh, that's fascinating, I put it in one of my weekly messages or a variation. I think the most fun part was back in 2021, I had a weekly message which talked about a early early primate called Gigantopithecus. And I said, if Gigantopithecus existed and he migrated to the Himalayas, who knows? He may have become the Yeti. Or if he migrated to the Northwest coast, he might have become the Sasquatch. Well, guess what? Just 2 weeks ago, I saw on Nova Attenborough talking about Gigantopithecus in the British Museum and saying that he most likely, if there was a Yeti, that's what he became. So he's verifying something that I created or I thought about back in 2021, and here it is, 2025, and of all things, Attenborough is verifying my theories. Mm-hmm. So that's why my mind just goes in all directions, plus the fact that I love art. If you ever came to our house, we have one art gallery after another, depending upon which room, and each room has a different theme.
The process of your writing must have been really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, stories are fun to hear. Okay, so what advice would you give to aspiring memoir writers who want to share their life experiences and lessons?
I would say that every individual has had life experiences which they could or should share, if not with the world, at least with their own progeny, so that there is some kind of memory, there's some kind of collection of their experiences, good, bad, and indifferent, so that other people can understand where they have come from and where their parents have had to experience, which created their life and their, shall we say, environment. So it helps them understand themselves. But at the same time, I'll lay 10 to 1 that 50% of the people have experiences which other people could identify with and would help them work their way through if they were willing to express it in writings, in books, and memoirs.
Okay, now let's go to personal reflections. How has writing this memoir affected your relationship with your daughter and your view of your life story?
Well, I always knew my life story was kind of wild and crazy, but my daughter has absolutely loved my letters. Mm-hmm. So I had a very positive reaction from my daughter all during the time that I was writing the letters. And whether she was with her roommates in undergraduate school, she was at Washington University, St. Louis, and she would share the letters with her roommates, and they all loved the letters too, and they were looking forward to them every time they came. And then later, when she was doing her graduate work, at University of San Francisco Medical School, and I might say at the same time doing a master's at Berkeley. She was getting these letters, and it just kind of reaffirmed her idea that, yeah, Papa, you've had a really wild life. And it's so wonderful to finally hear about it. And she still, I think, enjoys the letters. And it was a lot of fun sending them to her. And I think it's made our bond much closer because now she understands, gee, maybe Papa wasn't quite as crazy as I thought. Maybe he's a little bit crazier.
Okay. Before we end the interview, can I ask you if you have your physical copy of the book?
Oh, well, let's put it this way. I don't have it right handy,
Uh-huh.
but here is a picture of the book cover with one of the reviewers who put on Amazon. And so that is what the book cover looks like. That is me at age 8, done by a professional artist who actually studied in France. And while he was drawing that picture, it took 3 sessions to draw me, because he was he must have been in his 70s then. But at the same time, he was relating how he studied with Picasso. He knew Dali. He knew Monet, Manet, and all the artists of that time. So it was fascinating, him relating the story as he was drawing the picture to me. But as an unsolicited review says, Walter's early experiences and the story of his mother's experiences rival Forrest Gump's. And I just thought that was a marvelous review as well.
Mm-hmm. So can you say a few words to our audience or future readers to read your book? Can you invite them to read your book?
Well, as I said, here's a reviewer who said this is wilder than the story of Forrest Gump, and it's nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to really read a wild story, not only from my early years, but through college, and then into graduate, shall we say, through college, this is a book that will tell you a lot of what was going on in my history and my life. Now, mind you, I do say that sexuality is a major part of human experience, and there are some sexual episodes there. But my daughter originally said she didn't want to read those, and so every now and then you'll see something says letter not sent, and so if you want to go past those and ignore the sexual implications, that's fine with me. But I don't want to ignore the fact that sex is a major part of our life, and my experiences with sexuality is important as well. Mm-hmm. So that is included there as well. So it should be fun. And I might add not only my sexual experiences, but my mother's as well. She had some very traumatic experiences sexually as she was growing up and in her early adulthood as well. Mostly tragic, unfortunately.
Okay. So as we come to an end of our conversation today, I want to thank you again, Mr. Walter Benesch, for sharing your story with us. It's been such a pleasure to hear more about It's Me, the early years, letters to my daughter, and the deep connection between father and daughter you've captured in your letters. We wish you continued success with this book and with everything you do moving forward. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We hope you've enjoyed these conversations as much as we have. Until next time, keep reading, keep writing, and continue to cherish the stories that matter. See you again soon at Bookwrights House.
Live long and prosper.